Could the Denver Broncos be getting some help back with key players who've been missing on the defensive side of the ball? Could some players get activated off injured reserve for the PUP list? Well, we're going to dive deeper into that and much more in today's brand new episode, Good Morning Broncos. Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome to another episode of G&B, your daily bite-sized Broncos conversation with a cup of coffee every single morning here on Mile High Sports YouTube page, 9 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time. Mile High Sports, every team, every day here on our YouTube page. Please do us a huge favor. Hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on if you're a Colorado sports fan. We have the Denver Nuggets season coming back up here as they look to repeat on a championship year. Anilo Piro, Swipe a Cam, and our good friend Ryan Blackburn. They had Nuggets Media Day a couple of days ago. Make sure you go check out the latest video that we dropped here on Mile High Sports YouTube page. More to come every single day if you're a Colorado sports fan here. But we got a lot of Broncos conversation that we're going to get to here today. Thank you to our friends over there, Superbook Sports, for sponsoring today's episode of the show here. But kind of diving into it, let's open things up here. The Broncos defense, as we've known and we've discussed the last couple of weeks, it has been rough. It's been brutal, and teams have been attacking and tearing them apart. And I think when you look at the trend of Denver struggled against the Commanders, they got blown out the next week by the Buffalo Bills. You look at Denver struggling against the Miami Dolphins as bad as they did. The Buffalo Bills blew them out. And then now the Broncos here, they're Chicago. Denver obviously gave up over 471 yards of offense there. But now you look at this New York Jets team that's coming in here in week 5. They've had their fair share of struggles, and they actually look pretty decent against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. So a lot of attention is going to be focused on this matchup on Sunday, which kicks off 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time and Power Field at Mile High here. Denver's defense has got to find their footing. And I think one way that they can do that potentially is if they get some key guys back from injury. And look, there's a long list of guys who are injured. So first off, let's take a look at players who are on the active roster defensively who have missed some time that are, are potentially eligible. I didn't want to say ineligible. That was the wrong word there. That are potentially eligible to come back this week. We're going to take a look here at Justin Simmons. Broncos safety has been, dealing with that little hip and groin injury that's been impacting him since training camp. Made progress last week. We saw him on Wednesday and Thursday, and then we didn't see him on Friday, and that held him out of action on Sunday against the Chicago Bears. So if Justin participates this week, let's say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, limited, full, then it's a great sign for him to play on Sunday. If he's limited, more than likely we'll put him in line to be questionable for Sunday. But I think if he's a DNP this week, it might be a concern to watch here. But I think this kind of plays into some other guys that we'll talk about here in a minute. Mike Purcell suffered a rib injury against the Dolphins a couple of weeks ago. Did not play against the Chicago Bears. Maybe he'll be back in line this week. We'll see if that's the case. And then obviously Josie Jewell suffered a groin injury against the Dolphins as well. Is he going to be able to come back this week? Like I said, those guys were spotted on the side field last week, and Josie Jewell looked like he was moving well. But, with groins, you got to be delicate. You got to continue to stretch. You got to be able to try to get that movement under you, and a lot of it's about alignment. So he's been doing the necessary treatment. We'll see if he makes progress here this week. And if he's not able to go, more than likely you'll see Drew Sanders once again alongside Alex Singleton here for Denver defensively. But if Justin Simmons, hypothetically, let's say, were to miss some time and is not able to go this week against the Jets, Denver could look to P.J. Locke. Now, P.J. Locke and several players this week are eligible to return off of injured reserve. Now, Locke, K'Wan Williams, these two guys were put on injured reserve once roster cuts had happened, and once the 53-man roster was finalized, so it allowed them to free up a couple of roster spots while they go through the rehab process. P.J. Locke looks good in terms of just being ready to get out there. I've had some time to talk with him throughout the last couple of weeks. He's just so ready to get on the football field and start trying to help this team, whether that's on defense, whether that's on special teams. He's excited for that. I think we'll see him at some point here, maybe even today, activated off of injured reserve, and that's going to require some other things we'll dive into here as well. K'Wan Williams is also eligible to return off of short-term injured reserve. We'll see where he's at after he had ankle surgery prior to week 1 of the NFL season for something that's been bothering him throughout training camp. And then Alex Belcheski is a guy who's eligible to come off of IR, but, for him, he's an undrafted rookie free agent. Denver's okay right now at the offensive tackle position, so he may just stay on there. He may just become a redshirt player this year here for the Broncos, so don't be surprised if you see that. But we're also waiting to see, is Baron Browning going to be activated off the physically unable to perform list coming up this week here? Now, prior to the season beginning, we talked to Broncos GM George Payton, and he said that Baron is ahead of schedule. He's looked good in this progression. I can tell you, Baron has looked good in terms of what he's been able to do on the side field, the movement. I mean, he is massive in his upper arms and chest. Like, he can be a difference maker here for Denver, and I'm very curious to see how they might look to use him when he does come back, whether it's at outside linebacker, maybe even defensive end, or maybe the Broncos sliding one of the guys at outside linebacker that is already playing to DN and maybe getting him some reps in a rotational role. Frank Clark's also maybe expected to be back this week as well. He suffered an injury, a hip or an abductor. He told us he kind of suffered that kind of injury, plus a grade 3 tear in his groin area. That's held him out of action, but he told us last week that he could be back this week against the Jets. So another name to watch there. But for the guys that are on IR or PUP exclusively, the ones that we mentioned, the Paucheskis, the K'Wan Williams, the PJ Locks, and even the Baron Brownings, if Denver is going to activate these guys, they're going to have to make a corresponding roster move, right? Because these guys are not currently on the active roster. Those spots of them staying on those lists respectively added some opportunity for some other guys to come up onto the roster at the beginning of the season. So, let's say PJ Locke is activated this week, which I do expect to happen. That means that Denver's going to have to make a corresponding roster move by releasing a player on the active roster and seeing where things go here. But Denver's also done some shuffling as well on the practice squad. I mean, Denver defensively, they made a move yesterday. They waived cornerback Hussein Bassi, which to me, I'll be very honest with you folks, I'm a little surprised that they waived Bassi because he's a core 4 special teams player. He's a guy who stepped up and played in the nickel, had a hell of a preseason. And look, he's had some moments this season, the Dolphins game in particular where he struggled. Part of me is wondering here, was this just a move where they waived him and maybe they're trying to bring him back? I don't know, but it's freeing up a space. So is that going to be the move where Denver this week maybe goes through and adds, a guy like PJ Locke back to the active roster? But then Denver also made a move on the practice squad on Tuesday as well. They waived wide receiver Michael Bandy, who spent time with the team in training camp, and they brought in former New Orleans Saints wide receiver who's had, as we talked about last week, a terrific career arch really under Sean Payton in 4 years in New Orleans. And he's now signed to the practice squad there. So Denver has another receiver there. You could see some more roster moves and shuffling happen here. And if, let's say, Denver wants to bring PJ back, they want to bring K1 back this week, Baron Browning, for example, those 3 guys, well, Denver's going to have to make 3 corresponding roster moves here to be able to make that happen. So how does that impact maybe where Denver's roster is currently at? What positions do they maybe release a guy from, put them on waivers? And then if they really want those players back, what moves do they make on the practice squad to be able to free up space to bring those guys back? Like, it's going to be a little bit of a tough week here from a roster shuffling standpoint, but we'll see where Denver is at and maybe how they look to move forward here as well. Dwayne Washington, another player we'll talk about here, not injured here, but has been elevated for the 3 weeks from the Broncos practice squad to the active game day roster on Sundays because of his role and his play on special teams. Well, they can't do that anymore. They're either going to have to bring him to the active roster or they can't elevate him, so that's something you're going to have to keep an eye on as well here for the Broncos going forward. But there's a lot of movement, a lot of bits and pieces that are going on right now. And Denver's going to be back on the practice field here this afternoon at the Centura Health Training Center. And I think a lot of us are wondering, okay, what's the status on Javonte Williams? Where's he at in his recovery? Because in Sunday's game against the Bears, he had 2 carries, but he suffered a hip flexor injury that was reported by NFL Network. The initial prognosis was day-to-day. So I'll be very curious when we get out there today at practice, is he on the side field or is he dressed and maybe limited in today's practice that we're going to see at the Centura Health Training Center? And if not, can you get a little bit more of an expanded role for Jaleel McLaughlin? And if Javonte has to miss time, which running back are the Broncos going to look to elevate from the practice squad? Are you going to elevate if you have to put him on IR, which I don't think this is the case. If he's day-to-day, I don't think you put him on short-term IR. I don't even think that's in the cards or the works here. But then again, we only know so much here. And we're only going off the reports we got from the NFL Network of him being day-to-day. It wouldn't make sense. But if it's not a day-to-day injury for Javonte and he's going to miss some time, Denver may put him on short-term IR and they may elevate a guy. That might be your opportunity to get a guy like Dwayne Washington on the active roster or Tyler Beatty, who's on the practice squad. So I'm not sure where Denver's headed with some of these personnel moves and what's coming up, but it is going to give us, I think, a little bit of a bigger idea as to what they need to do as the Jets matchup approaches here on Sunday, which that's going to be a tough matchup for Denver. And I think so many people I've seen some people overlook the New York Jets. They're going through their struggles. Obviously, losing Aaron Rodgers has been a big blow to them. But Zach Wilson played a hell of a game against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, and they have a really good offense. They have a really good rushing counterpart there. Their rushing offense this season hasn't been good, but they have three backs that are very damn good at running the football between Michael Carter, talk about Breece Hall, who had a 62-yard touchdown run against the Broncos last season in a game that Denver lost. And unfortunately for Hall, he tore his ACL in that game. So for him, he's coming back to a spot where that had happened. He's an explosive runner. I think he had 56 yards on 6 carries last week for the New York Jets. So they're doing really a by-committee approach. Oh, and then they added Dalvin Cook. So they have three backs that are very capable. And as we've seen the trend here for the Broncos defensively, in the last 2 weeks combined against the Dolphins, against the Bears, they've allowed 521 rushing yards on the ground. They've also allowed quarterbacks to throw at an astronomical completion percentage. So this is I don't know how Denver's defense is going to match up against this offense, because as talented as Denver is at certain positions on defense, but the way that the defense has been playing, the way that the scheme has been playing, it doesn't give Broncos fans, if you're watching this, I don't want to speak for you, but like the majority consensus of fans that I've spoken to, I've seen comments from on YouTube, people have told me on Twitter, they don't have confidence in this defense, and rightfully so. There hasn't been anything on the tape to showcase that. Now, I'd say the comeback effort, they buckled down in the second half. They got stops against the Bears. They're going to face some tougher offenses going forward here, and they can't afford to make some of those same mistakes that they've been making the last 3 weeks against the Commanders, the Dolphins, and now not the Buffalo Bills. That's coming up week 10, the Chicago Bears. So there's so much to look at here, and I don't know how Denver's going to counteract that. And obviously, if you can get a guy like Justin Simmons back, Josie Jewell back, let's say Frank Clark, Baron Browning, PJ Locke, K'Wan Williams, you get some of these key guys back, I certainly think it'll help with where Denver is at and what they're trying to accomplish. But it's tough to find that continuity. And look, these guys are coming off of injuries. They're going to have to get comfortable popping with the pads. Like, these guys haven't played yet, a majority of them. The guys that are coming off IR, they haven't played this year. They haven't played in the preseason outside of PJ. PJ, I think, played the one preseason game, if I'm not mistaken, before he suffered the ankle injury. But K1 hasn't played yet this year. So they got guys that haven't even had their first football action of the 2023 season. So I'm very curious to see, like, with them waving and saying Bassey, if K'Wan Williams not ready yet. Now, we know Jaquan McMillan got the start last week for Bassey there inside the nickel. Do we see Riley Moss maybe step up to an elevator role inside the nickel and the dime package here for Denver? Something to keep an eye on here if you're watching their Broncos country. But I don't have all the answers right now. And I think the defense is trying to figure out how they can find the answers to get some stops. They were 2 points away from allowing 100 points in 2 weeks. But here's the glaring statistic, right? We talked about the 521 yards rushing in 2 weeks. Well, Denver's allowed over 1,000 yards of offense in the last 2 weeks to two teams. So, I mean, in combined, that is not good. And the New York Jets, who have been trying to figure out how to get right, seemingly got right against the Kansas City Chiefs. They did some really good things. You talk about Garrett Wilson. You talk about at tight end, CJ Uzama. I mean, Denver's been bitten by tight ends this season so far, early on through the early parts of the season. Cole Kmet's coming off of a 2-touchdown game against Denver last week. So how does Uzama look with his size and how they scheme some things up here? I'd be very curious. And not to mention, this is the Nathaniel Hackett week here for the Denver Broncos, and everything that's stemming from the offseason comments from Sean Payton. There's going to be a lot of conversation surrounding this game. There's going to be a lot of buildup. But you know what? The stuff that matters the most is the work, and the work gets put in here today, gets put in tomorrow, gets put in on Friday, and the team's going to go out there on Sunday, and they're going to have to play, and they're going to have to try to get their second win of the season against a very, very tough and aggressive New York Jets defense that has so many talented players. When we talk about Whitehead at the back end at safety, when you talk about Sauce Gardner, I mean, you even talk about other guys on the defensive line, Quincy Williams at linebacker, CJ Mosley, Quinnen Williams. I mean, they have a multitude of players who can just absolutely dominate you. Jermaine Johnson, a guy who was a rookie last year that, I think he kind of redshirted, came back a little early, if I'm not mistaken, but he was a guy we were high on in the pre-draft process for the Broncos as a potential edge rusher. Number 11, get to know him because he's going to be a guy that's going to be an impact player for them. It's going to be a tough challenge here for the Denver Broncos and their offense. And look, the offense is playing well, but they can't make some of the consistency mistakes that they've made so far here in the early parts of the season against that defense, because they're going to send 5, they're going to send 6, they're going to send 7 guys, because they got guys and they have belief in their secondary that they can play press man-to-man coverage and send the house to force Russell Wilson to have to get the ball out quickly, but throw it into contested coverage where They got guys that can make plays on the football. So that's how I think the Jets defense is going to try to game plan against Denver's offense. Denver's going to have to find a way to run the ball. Heck, I'm begging. Like the Broncos, you win the coin toss this week at home, take the damn ball to open up the game so you can maybe have a chance to go up 7-0. I mean, 3 or 4 of Denver's games this season, 3 of the first 4 games, they've scored an opening touchdown on their opening drive. Denver's going to have to go do that this week against the Jets. But if Denver, for example, defers to the second half, which they've done so far, they're undefeated in a coin toss, but they get the ball back in the second half, and outside of maybe Chicago, I mean, Denver has not done anything with that. They haven't done anything offensively since that. So if you find yourself in a position where the defense is on the field and they give up a touchdown, you're down 7-0, like it's going to really kind of throw some of the things you want to do offensively out of the window from your game plan standpoint. Denver can't afford to be in that position this week against the New York Jets. But Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of GMB here on Mile High Sports YouTube page. Just want to say thank you so much for your time here this morning. Go get yourself another cup of coffee. And I got to head over to practice here at the Centura Health Training Center here. We'll get a full Broncos report. We'll get all the recap and coverage. We'll take a look at maybe the tail of the tape on tomorrow's brand new episode. Good Morning Broncos. Appreciate you there, Broncos country. Do us a favor, subscribe or follow the YouTube page so we can continue to grow. If you're a Colorado sports fan, Mile High Sports, every team, every day.